Chapter 64 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinemala. Chapter 64. As she looked then, she never looked again. So September came and went, and as yet she had come to no decision. Lord Kelso was going away then, going to town on business connected with the marriage, and Beatrice confided to Agatha her sorrow at losing him. "I have learned to love him so well," she said. "At first, when I thought how soon we were to be married, I was not sorry, you know. But it seemed to me soon that I had hardly had time to enjoy my girlhood, and it was almost over. But now I would not change it for the world. I would not have it one day later. I am miserable even that he is going to leave me for so short a time." And she, listening, knowing all, could not utter one word. Lord Kelso went, leaving behind him nothing but praise and good words, while Agatha lived through what seemed to her a torture of suspense. She could come to no decision. The way was dark before her. Lord Kelso was to return at the end of October for a few weeks, and then they were not to meet again until the wedding day. It was settled for the 22nd of December. The bright hours passed, and with each one bringing her nearer to the one she loved, Beatrice became happier every day. She was in the highest spirits. Her beautiful face was bright with smiles. To look at her was to feel young and happy and gladsome, while every day the gentle heart of Agatha Brooke grew more heavy, more uncertain, more despairing. Her thoughts and ideas did not seem to grow clearer. Every day she saw greater preparations made for that marriage which seemed to her so cruel, and Beatrice, loving her better every day, trusted her more and more. She talked to Agatha of her future, of that future which seemed so bright to her, of what she should do when she lived at Gaswood, until there were times when the brave, patient spirit broke down and Agatha turned away with a moan on her lips. Nearer and nearer, every day now brought boxes and chests to the castle. Every day brought some portion or other of the elaborate trousseau which might have been prepared for a princess. Nothing else was spoken about. It was always Lord Kelso and the wedding and the trousseau, until even Lady Penrith laughed and said the subject must be changed. What was she to do? She had no one to help or advise her. She had no certain rules to guide her. She could not tell, as she generally did, at the first glance what was right and was wrong. If anyone had ever prophesied to Agatha that the time would come when she would hesitate, as she was doing now, not knowing right from wrong, she would never have believed them. Now she would have given much for a ray of light to guide her on a dark road. The chill, Sarah month of October brought the Earl back again to Penrith Castle. It was like a real coming home, for he had forgotten no one. Lady Penrith raised her hands and eyes in amazement at the number and splendour of the presents he brought with him. The children were in ecstasy. They wished that such a lover came every day, and Beatrice was happier in a quiet fashion. She said less, but Agatha saw that she loved him more. Her loving heart could not rest until she had caught one glimpse of him. She went to one of the unused rooms of the eastern wing, that she might watch him from thence as he mounted his horse. He looked well and strong, but there was no happiness in the dark, handsome face. She could have stretched out her hands to him with the loving cry. Ah, if she dare! If that beautiful head were turned to her but for one moment, and the dark eyes flashed recognition into hers. "I shall drive myself mad," she said as she turned resolutely away. She saw little of Beatrice for the next few days. Only at times she caught sight of a glad young face, beautiful in its love and hope. Then suddenly, as a thunderstorm breaks on a summer day, a shock came to her. An event happened, perhaps the most terrible and the most unlikely. The whole party, it was a mild warm day in October, one of those which come at rare intervals, and the whole party of guests, with Lord and Lady Penrith, had driven over to one of the neighbouring mansions where they were expected to take luncheon. On such occasions, when the beautiful, stately old mansion was empty, it was Agatha's delight to roam over it, to visit the picture gallery and the drawing rooms so full of beauty and luxury. Many little things that she saw this morning touched her heart deeply. Some music belonging to Beatrice lay upon the piano in the drawing room. She saw her name written upon it in Vane's handwriting. She bent down and kissed it, her eyes filling with hot tears. Just then the sound of footsteps on the terrace attracted her attention. Surely they had not returned yet. She went quickly to the window. She knew that the Earl and Beatrice had ridden together. If any unforeseen incident had brought them back again, she must go and see. But a strange figure was there. A carriage, evidently hired from the nearest railway station or hotel, stood before the grand entrance, and a lady had just descended from it and was walking up to the hall door. A tall, stately figure, clad in a black simple dress and wearing a black veil, quite a stranger to Penrith, for by mistake she had turned to the terrace on the left. A stranger, yet there was something almost terrible familiar in her style and carriage. The lady went up to the great hall door, and then Agatha heard a long, loud peal. In some vague way it struck horror into her. It filled her with dread, and then she reproached herself for being weak and foolish. Yet some impulse led her to the great entrance hall, where she overheard a footman talking to the stranger. A sudden horror, a dreadful trembling seized her. The tones of that voice were quite familiar. A half-sharp, half-imperious voice with a piquant French accent. Her heart almost stood still. A chill terrible as the cold of death came over her. What could it mean? Surely as she was living, surely as the bright sun shone in a blue sky, that was the voice of Valerie Danvers. She stood for a few moments in horrible distress and suspense. Then she heard the same voice, but this time in far more imperious accents. Says, I have travelled some distance at great inconvenience to myself to see Lord and Lady Penrith on very important business, and I shall not go away until I have seen them. If they are not at home, I will wait here until they return. It was Valerie, brilliant, beautiful Valerie. What had brought her here? Valerie who had slain her with cruel words. Valerie who had robbed her of her happiness, her life and her love. Valerie whose cruel perfect face had bent over her in the agony that had been more bitter than the agony of death. Looking neither to the right nor the left, never deigning to let her eyes fall on the figure standing so silent, Valerie swept through the great entrance hall, and Agatha anxiously followed her with her eyes. Show me into a room where there is a fire, she said. If I have to wait some hours, I shall feel the cold. Agatha saw a peculiar smile on the servant's face as he opened the door of one of the anterooms where a good fire was blazing. She swept in, and the man closed the door. Agatha, with a white wild look on her face, went up to him. Who is that Lady John? She asked. I do not know, miss. She would not give any name or any card. She wants to see my lord and my lady, and see them she will. I should think she is a French lady by her accent and manner. John had no more to say, and Agatha knew that it would not be safe to indulge in any curiosity. It was Valerie. There could be no denying that. No mistake. And judging from her manner, Valerie in her most haughty and determined mood. At first Agatha felt quite sure that it was to seek her that the French woman was there. She must have heard that she had made her way into the world of pure and good women, from which she declared her shut out. She had come to betray her, to tell the story of her fatal mistake, to ruin her by driving her from this haven of rest, where she had found peace. It must be that. There was nothing else to bring her here. Yet why should she persecute her? Why, after this long interval of time, seek to do her harm? Valerie could know nothing of the Penriths. It could be from no interest in them that she was anxious to betray her. Another thing was, how could it be possible that she should have traced her there? Then another and even more terrible idea came to her, one that made her tremble. It was perhaps not for her that Valerie had come, but for Lord Kelso. She knew nothing of what had passed between Sir Vane and Valerie, but she was wiser now than when she lived in the beautiful castle by the lake. She had thought it all over since and had come to the conclusion that the part Valerie played had been suggested by jealousy. Could it be possible that she had come to harm him? And the woman whom he had wronged and betrayed felt her heart warm and her courage rise. Valerie should not injure him. No one should. No one should hurt a hair of his head. She would stand before him, if need should be, and receive the sword thrust meant for him. He had betrayed her, wronged her, inflicted the deadliest injury upon her, but no one should ever hurt him. She would give her life for him cheerfully, as she had given her heart and her love. And the woman who should have hated him found herself weeping hot tears lest harm should come to him, never while she could avert it. Then again she could not see what harm could be done. It did not matter to Valerie whether he married or not, or whom he married. One thing was certain, he could never have had any thought of marrying her, or he would have done so. She was miserably anxious. At one time she thought of going to Valerie and asking her what she was there for. Then the fear came to her that she might perhaps be doing more harm than good. She did not know in what manner her rash interference would end. She stood at the window when the party returned, and the first two who came up the long avenue were Beatrice and the Earl, riding side by side. She smiling, blushing, happy, as she would never be in this world again. The sunshine fell upon her face, on her figure. They seemed to have found a home in the radiant eyes raised to her lover's face. And as she looked then, in the light of the sun, in the light of her love, she never looked again. They rode up to the front, the grand entrance, and with some little confusion of laughing and talking, they entered the house. She knew afterward all that passed when time had healed the bitter wounds. At first no word was said of the strange lady. Then the footman came to tell Lady Penrith that a visitor was waiting for her. "A French lady?" said Lady Penrith. "I have no idea who it can be." She went at once to the anteroom, where Valerie, tall and stately, awaited her. She rose in silence when the mistress of the castle entered, and made her most stately bow. "You wish to see me?" said Lady Penrith quietly, wondering who this brilliant, beautiful French woman could be. "Yes, I have come some distance to see you, Lady Penrith. I wish also to see Lord Penrith, and a gentleman who is staying here." "I do not quite understand," said Lady Penrith haughtily. "You will understand afterward, madam. I cannot explain. I must see Lord Penrith. Will you kindly allow me to ask you one question? Have you a gentleman visiting you called Lord Kelso?" "I do not understand the question," replied Lady Penrith. "I do not feel inclined to answer it. I know that I am doing something quite unconventional, Lady Penrith, but I feel quite sure when you know the motive, you will say that I am more than justified. I have a carriage waiting, and my time is limited. May I ask if I can see Lord Penrith?" "I do not know what to say. This is a very unusual proceeding. Would you tell me to whom I have the pleasure of speaking?" "You will not know my name when you hear it, Lady Penrith, but I will tell it to you with pleasure. I am Valerie Danvers." And Lady Penrith in her turn bowed. She knew the name was one of the best in France. That slightly changed the aspect of affairs. A noble lady would not be there on a trifling errand. "I wish," continued Valerie, "to make a communication to you and to Lord Penrith, but it must be made in the presence of Lord Kelso." Then Lady Penrith began to fear, began to wonder what was coming. Her face grew pale, and she rang the bell with a trembling hand. "I wish to see Lord Penrith at once," she said. "Ask him not to delay." End of chapter 64. Chapter 65 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay-Mala. Chapter 65. A Folly or a Crime. It was not easy to find Lord Penrith. He had gone to speak to the head gardener, who was waiting for him, and the two had walked together to some distant spot of the garden. While the footman was looking for him, the two ladies sat in perfect silence. At first Lady Penrith had felt no alarm. True, the proceeding was rather unusual, but the lady herself did not look commonplace. Yet as the minutes passed, and those dark eyes, with their sombre depths of passion and power, watched her with that silent intense gaze, Lady Penrith began to feel sick at heart. What could it be? Nothing surely, which could hurt her husband or hurt Beatrice, beautiful happy Beatrice. Surely nothing that could hurt her. Yet the thought fastened like a serpent on her heart. Her face grew pale and still. The dark eyes of the other woman never wavered, never took their glance from her. It was a relief to her when she heard her husband's footsteps. "Here is Lord Penrith," she said, but no change came over the solemn gloom of the beautiful foreign face. The very sight of him, when he opened the door, gave to Lady Penrith a sense of protection. Nothing could go very far wrong when her husband was near. He looked at Valerie in wonder, quick enough to see the sombre beauty of her face and to recognize from its expression that she was there on no peaceful errand. He glanced at his wife. "You want me, Philippa?" he said. And then the strange lady rose from her seat and stood before him, tall, erect, and stately. "No, it is I who wish to see you, Lord Penrith," she said. "I have come from some distance, and at some inconvenience, for this purpose of seeing you and Lady Penrith. Would you kindly see that the door is closed, and that we have no interruption?" For all answer, Lord Penrith turned round and locked the door. "We are quite secure now," he said. "No one will come near us." "I am a stranger to you, Lord Penrith," said the stately lady. "Let me introduce myself to you. I am Valerie Danvers, the name you will recognize as one well known in France." He bowed low, feeling, as his wife had done, that there was something unusual and extraordinary to bring this lady in this fashion to them. "You admit the fact?" she asked. "Do you doubt my identity? If so, I can prove it to you in many ways." "I do not dispute it," said the Earl. "I should like briefly to say a few more words about myself," she continued, "so that you can rest assured of my respectability and responsibility. Unlike most French unmarried ladies, I am perfectly independent. My father left me a good fortune, and I have been accustomed to spend one half of my time among my friends in Paris. The other half has been spent with my aunt, Madame la Bohona Danvers, at the chateau of Belleflas in Switzerland, and it is in consequence of what I saw there that I am here now. I must explain that my aunt lost the greater part of her fortune, and that in order to make up her income, she during the spring and summer lets the greater part of the chateau to the rich English who go abroad. You will understand soon why I tell you this. In what I have to say, do not for one moment imagine that I am speaking untruthfully. If I did, you could find it out and punish me. But every word I have to say to you is as true as it is that the sun shines in heaven. Therefore, as I tell you my story, do not seek comfort in these words. It cannot be true. It is true. I should not have come all this distance to tell lies." She looked suddenly up into Lord Penrith's face. "You have staying here with you now the Earl of Kelso, who was Sir Vane Carleon some years ago, but who succeeded very unexpectedly and through some terribly sudden death to the Kelso title and estates." Lord Penrith bowed. This was a true statement, and there was nothing to be answered. "I have read," she continued, "in papers, which should be well informed, that Lord Kelso is about to marry your eldest daughter, Beatrice Penrith." "Oh, heaven, Beatrice!" cried Lady Penrith. It seemed as though her fears and doubts were to be realized. She stretched out her hands as though she would ward off a blow. "Beatrice," she repeated, and Lord Penrith went up to her. He knew how she loved this beautiful child. He threw his strong arm round her. "Hush, Philippa," he said gently. "Wait and hear. There are always two sides to every question. Listen, perhaps we can reply." "I am sorry for you," said Valerie to Lady Penrith. "If I could do my duty without stabbing you to the heart, I would, but I cannot. You have accepted Lord Kelso as a suitor for your daughter, therefore you consider him an honourable man. I believe so, said Lord Penrith stiffly. He did not like the lady's manner or the triumph that he saw shining in her dark eyes. If wrong had been done to Beatrice, great heaven, how he would avenge it! You would not take a servant into your household without strict inquiries as to character, honesty, and integrity. Would you, Lord Penrith? Certainly not, he replied, although I do not see what that has to do with the question. Only this, she replied, her lips curling. Only this, that if you had made as many inquiries about your daughter's lover as you would have made over a housemaid or a groom, you would never have consented to his becoming your daughter's husband. Oh, Beatrice, my beautiful bright Beatrice, wailed Lady Penrith. And then her husband spoke sharply. We have heard nothing that affects Beatrice yet, he said. Had you made your inquiries about him, persisted Valerie, you would have found out that he was not fit to marry a young innocent child like your daughter. That although he bears the name of a great man, although people say there is no real harm in him, and that he is his own worst enemy, there are deeper, darker crimes to be laid to his charge. Crimes that have blackened his soul until, I repeat, the white pure soul of your daughter would shudder at contact with it. Assertion is not proof, said Lord Penrith coldly. I can give you proof, she said. All the world, that is, all the fashionable world of London, knows and will remember the terrible scandal about Lady G. She was young and beautiful. Her husband was many years older than herself. She had 3 little daughters, baby girls. Sir Vane was a young man then, handsome enough to win the heart of any woman. He won hers. He took the poor hapless lady from her husband, her children, and her home. She gave up all the world for him. He tired of her in a few months. The love that was to have been immortal died, as wicked love always does. And she has been lost ever since. Do you call that a folly or a crime, Lord Penrith? A crime, he answered in a loud, clear voice. But Lady Penrith laid her gentle hand on her husband's shoulder and cried out again for Beatrice, her beloved child. You are right, said Valerie. It was a crime. No honourable man could give his daughter to a man whose hands were red with the heart's blood of another woman. There are people in the world, she continued, who profess to think highly of such things, and will tell you that a young man must sow his wild oats. You are not one of those, Lord Penrith. I am not, he replied proudly. I thought not. I pass over many such stories I have heard, and I will relate the one I know myself to be true, and in which I must unfortunately take a part. Lord Penrith laid his hand caressingly on the gentle head of his wife. It was some comfort that whatever they had to bear, they could bear it better together. I have told you, continued Valerie, that I lived with my aunt, Madame Danvers, in the Chateau Belleflas, and that it was her habit during the spring and summer to let part of the castle and the grounds. I think it is about 5 years since a young Englishman wrote to her, signing himself Harriet, and saying that he would like to take the chateau not for a few months, but for a year or 2. There was only himself, his wife, and their servants. The terms he offered were so liberal that my aunt saw at once she had to do with the rich English who do not count money. They agreed, and the Englishman brought his wife and settled down comfortably at the chateau. They must have been enormously rich, as my aunt said, for they spared no luxury. They had everything in the wide world they wished, carriages, horses. They went where they would, and did as they would. When I went as usual to spend some months at her chateau, I found my aunt enchanted with her lodgers. Above all, with the fair, beautiful girl they called Mrs. Harriet. It was only natural that I should be very much with them. We were all young, and Mr. Harriet, one of the most charming and fascinating of men. No one could resist him. I did not think at first there was anything strange in the matter. It seemed to me quite natural that a young husband, devoted as Mr. Harriet was to his wife, would naturally prefer the beautiful solitude of Belleflas to crowded places, where he would have less time to spend with her. There were times when I envied her. and thought how strange it was that she should have everything and I nothing. She was unlike anyone else. She was fair as an angel, and what was more, she had the fair white soul of an angel. I must bear this testimony to her that she was without exception the best, the purest, the most perfect woman I have ever known. She had the most spiritual soul. When I have looked at her, I have often thought that her heart lived in heaven. She was so kind, so charitable, so good to the poor, so tender and loving to everyone. If I tried, I could not describe her. I bow to her in involuntary homage now as I speak of her. At first, I had no suspicion, but after a time we talked as all girls do about love and marriage. My suspicions were first aroused when I found that she had not been married in a church. I need not go through the details, nor weary you by telling you how I found out the truth, and the truth was sickening and revolting. Mr. Harriet, whom you know as Sir Vane, and Lord Kelso had most cruelly deceived this girl. She was as innocent as an angel, and he had taken advantage of her innocence. He had deceived her in the most heartless fashion, and while she believed herself to be his wife, she was no more married to him than I, Lord Penrith, am married to you. A low wail from Lady Penrith, and again her husband soothed her with loving words. Do not forget that we have heard only one side, Philippa. There are always two sides to every question. Let us wait before we judge. You shall have every chance of judging, said Valerie. You shall bring us face to face. End of chapter 65. Chapter 66 of The Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay-Mala. Chapter 66. Let him deny it if he can. The persistent, quiet, methodical manner in which this story was told did at last touch Lord Penrith. It must be true, or she could not enter upon such details. His brown, handsome face grew pale, his eyes were troubled, and a curious, faint sickness of heart came over him. What would happen to Beatrice if this were true? I found out, continued Valerie, that Mr. Harriet was really Sir Vane Harriet Carleon of Gaswood, a rich English nobleman, and then I understood it. The girl with the fair white soul of an angel had been betrayed. I hesitated for some time what to do. To tell her seemed cruel as murder. Ah, murder would have been more merciful, 10 times more merciful. But I knew that she must know. I did not dare to tell my aunt. Her anger and indignation would have been so great. Then I must confess, I must tell a weakness of my own from which I shrank. I loved him. He made love to me. He wooed me, he flattered me and complimented me until he won my heart. He said this much to me, that if he were free, he would marry me, and I knew that he was free. Some low muttered words came from Lord Penrith. She went on. At last I told her the truth. It was a cruel, bitter truth to her. I told it in language strong enough to make her comprehend the difference between herself and other women who were classed as good. You may believe me, I do not think that I am very sensitive, nor so tender of heart as other women are. But I felt when I was telling her that I was slaying her. She went away. No one knows how or whither. My own opinion is that she lies dead in the depths of Lake Lucerne. Do you call that a folly or a crime, Lord Penrith? A crime, he repeated solemnly. A crime, she added, worse than murder. Murder only takes the human life from the human body. A crime like this destroys the soul. I have this more to add. She went away to her death, as I believe, and he, after a long search for her, gave up all hope of finding her. He had told me that he would marry me if he were free, and I know now that he had been free all along. I expected the fulfillment of his promise. But he? Ah, heaven! How I hate him when I think of it. He taunted me, sneered at me, cursed me because I had striven to take the girl from him, cursed me with the same lips that only so lately had spoken to me of love. And I swore vengeance against him. I told him that I would pursue him so long as I lived, that I would haunt him until death, that my vengeance should never fail. It is in accordance with my vow that I am here. Do not think me better than I am. I have not sought you to save your daughter from what seems to me worse than a living death. I have sought you and told you the truth about him in order to be revenged upon him. If he stood at the altar, I would stand by his side and proclaim to the whole world what I know. It is possible, she continued, that you may not believe my story. It is possible you may believe it, yet because he is a wealthy earl, you may still consent to your daughter's marriage. Or perhaps that because you know your daughter loves him and you do not wish to pain her, you may not interfere. I warn you, Lord Kelso promised to marry me, and while I live, he shall marry no other woman. I will go before him at the altar. I will denounce him before priest and people. If you let your daughter marry him, your name and hers shall be allied with the greatest scandal ever known in the land. I warn you, and I do not warn you in vain. I think, said Lord Penrith coldly, that you are a bad, vindictive, malignant woman. I am quite sure of it, she replied. I am even worse than that if you knew all. But despite that, my story is quite true. Lady Penrith raised her head. I do not believe it, she said. Oh, Hildebrand, I am sure it is not true. Lord Kelso loves Beatrice, and she, well, you know, dear, that her life is wrapped up in his. Do not believe her. She hates him. It is only a cruel, malicious plot. I will not believe her. I will not indeed. You forget, Lady Penrith, that I have offered to prove all I have said. I can bring not one but 100 witnesses to prove that I am right. I challenge you to bring Lord Kelso into my presence and let him deny one word of this if he can. Remember, I have only told you 2 stories, and that there are many others untold. I can give you no fairer proof that I am speaking the truth than this. Bring him here face to face with me. Husband and wife looked at each other. Surely that seemed like truth and seemed honorable. She did not bring accusations against him in the dark. She asked to see him face to face. Bring him here, she repeated. And if he denies one word of this, I will own that I am wrong and that I have invented all I have said. Husband and wife looked still at each other. What was to be done? I do not ask a favor that you should summon him, she said. I demand it as a right. I appeal to you. Bring here this man who has spoiled my life and see how he meets the charges made against him. Lord Penrith rang the bell and unlocked the door. Ask Lord Kelso if he will come here, he said to the servant man, and again there was a pause. Valerie would have continued talking, but Lord Penrith said, There will be no need now for another word until he comes. Then he drew Lady Penrith away from the table to the other end of the room, and the 2 stood in earnest conversation together. Under the same roof and at the same time 2 other scenes were taking place full of interest. Agatha, knowing that Valerie was with Lord and Lady Penrith, was almost mad with suspense. Was it about her and about Vane that she was there? It must be one or the other. What would happen? Would she be sent away in disgrace? Or would anything go wrong with Beatrice and Lord Kelso? I would rather die myself, she said, than that anything should happen to Beatrice. She tried to attend to the children's lessons, but it was impossible. She could not even hear what they said. All her heart, thought and interest were with Valerie. What was she doing? What was she saying? She could not bear it. She left the lessons and the children to their fate and went to her own room, while Lord Kelso and Beatrice, having half an hour to spare, had found their way to the music room. There was no fear of interruption, no fear of intruders, and happy Beatrice enjoyed half an hour with her stately lover. Oh, love, if you were only here! beside me in this mellow light. Though all the bitter winds should blow, and all the ways be choked with snow, it would be a true Arabian night, sang Beatrice. And Lord Kelso, smiling at the clear young voice and pretty words, said, I am here, Beatrice. You have but the one love, I suppose. Only one, said the girl, raising her eyes to his, and I shall never have another. You and you only. One life will not be enough to love you in. He felt with a sharp pang of pain how unworthy he was of this sweet girlish idolatry. When he was with Beatrice, as with Agatha, he always wished himself a better man. My little love, he whispered, I wish I were more worthy of your love, but I will do my best to make you very happy. I could not be anything else but happy, she said. I should be happy if even I only saw you once each day. But to be with you every day and all day long is too much happiness to bear thinking about. I say to myself often, it can never be true. I cannot realize it. When you have been staying here and go away again, it is just as though sunlight changed to darkest night. I am to live always in brightest sunshine, am I not? Yes, always, my darling, he said, always. Just then a footman came to the door with a message that Lord Penrith would be much obliged if Lord Kelso would go to him at once. He wanted to see him. That is unkind, said Beatrice. Just the only few minutes I have to spend with you. If Papa knew how cruel it was, he would never have sent for you. She smiled as he bent down and kissed her lips, whispering some loving words to her, and no one living ever saw the same smile on her face again. He went, wondering what particular business the Earl could have with him just before dinner, and regretted that he had not spent the half hour with Beatrice. It was too bad. He had no more idea of what awaited him than a laughing child has of grim death. Come in, said Lord Penrith, who was longing to be able to speak his mind, but who was restrained by prudence for a time. Lord Kelso went in. They knew he was guilty, and that she had spoken the truth when they saw his face, as it looked when his eyes fell upon her. Lord Penrith left his wife's side, and advanced to meet him. I want you, Lord Kelso, he said. This lady, Mademoiselle Danvers, has come here expressly to make certain charges against you. I would not believe them, but she challenged me to bring you face to face with her. The woman loved him. Her face changed, paled, grew crimson and quivered. Her eyes glowed and darkened. Lord Kelso, who had quickly recovered his self-possession, turned to her with a bow, which she returned. This is your vengeance, he said. Yes, she replied. This is my vengeance. Will you answer some questions, Lord Kelso? She said. Questions which I shall ask on your honour as a gentleman. He looked contemptuously at her, but made no reply. Is the story told of you and Lady G true or not? She asked. Of what consequence can it be to you? He replied. I would not condescend to answer you. No, I felt sure that you would speak the truth. If not, Lord Penrith, who wishes to know the truth, had better put the question himself. Is it true? Asked Lord Penrith with a dark frown. I am ashamed to say that it is perfectly true, he replied. It was a horrible crime, but if anything could redeem it, it was the frank manly fashion in which he owned it. You see that I was right, cried Valerie in triumph. Now let him deny, if he can, that he deceived one of the most innocent and beautiful girls in the world, that he made her believe in some wretched attempt at a mock marriage, and took her away with him to Switzerland, where she lived with him for some time, believing herself to be his wife. Is this true? He looked at Lord Penrith as though the question came from him. To my eternal regret, sorrow and condemnation, he replied, it is true. There was a dead silence for 1/2 minute. Then a muttered curse fell from the white lips of Lord Penrith. And again Valerie cried in triumph. You see now that I have spoken the truth. End of chapter 66. Chapter 67 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay. Chapter 67. Doomed to a lifelong sorrow. Lord Kelso was not a hardened man. He recoiled with pain when Lady Penrith turned her white face, haggard with misery, to him. Why have you done this to my Beatrice? What has she done to you that you should spoil her life? Oh heaven, who is to tell her? And she preparing for her wedding day? Lord Kelso's voice was full of emotion as he said, Lady Penrith, I do not know in what words to answer you. I wish that I had been dead before I had brought this trouble to you and to Beatrice. I wish indeed that I had died. Will you listen to me for a few minutes? I cannot make any excuses for myself. I do not wish to make less of my sin, but let me say this much for myself. If I had my life to live over again, I would act differently. I say it with tears of sorrow and contrition, that I have never studied anything except myself and my own pleasures. Only heaven knows whether it will be any excuse for me to say that I was never taught. I was born the heir to great wealth, and I always thought I could do as I liked. I am not all bad. I believe that if anyone had ever said to me that self-control and self-restraint were noble, I might have tried to be noble. As it was, quite naturally, I thought of nothing but my own pleasure. I have never done what the world would call a mean thing. I have been generous. I may even say charitable. But I have not respected the claims of women. I am doubly ashamed to say it in the presence of such a woman as you, Lady Penrith. But I am afraid I have merely looked upon them as toys. I have found out my mistake. They have the virtues of angels, the vices of devils. I love Beatrice. I feel that my lips are not worthy to mention her name. I love her because she is like an angel. He turned to Valerie. You can say what more you will, he said quietly. You have had your revenge. Yes, I have had it. And the taste of it is sweet to my lips, she said. Lord Kelso turned to the unhappy parents. Whatever you have to say to me, wait until this woman has gone. She has had her vengeance, let her go. I have more to say before I go, said Valerie. It is easy to deceive a foolish woman. It is easy to betray innocence or simplicity. But it is not so easy to deceive and betray a French noblewoman. I told you that my revenge should last my life. Every time you attempt to make any woman believe in you or attempt to make any woman marry you, I will repeat what I have done this time. He made no answer. A contemptuous smile curled his lips. A woman's threats would never move him. I will not retaliate upon a woman, he said, or I might in my turn make certain revelations not very pleasant for Mademoiselle Danvers to hear. Out of contemptuous pity, I will keep her secret. She has told you some of the truth, but she has not told you what a snake in the grass she proved herself to the girl whom she drove to her death. I tell you honestly that I loved that girl with my whole heart, and that I would have married her legally and properly long ago, but that I was ashamed to let her know I had deceived her before. If that woman with her horrible treachery had not come between us, in all probability we should have been married. I love Beatrice because she resembles in her purity, her innocence and sweet gaiety the girl whom this woman murdered with false words. Hush, cried Lord Penrith. You must never mention my daughter's name again. Lord Kelso's handsome face grew deadly pale. Is it so? He said. I cannot complain. You see, mademoiselle, your work is well done. Your revenge is very complete. You have doomed a bright, happy, loving girl to a lifelong sorrow. She whose name I may never more mention need never have known of my wrongdoing. Hundreds of men have done the same thing, but they have settled down afterward, have married good women, and have so become good men. I might have done the same. Living with one so good and pure would have made a good man of me. I could have protected her from all evil and have made her very happy. The recollection of what she had been saying when he left her came back to him. His voice faltered, and the tears came to his eyes. You have had full vengeance, mademoiselle. I scorn to retaliate. If you wish to know whether you have succeeded in making me suffer, yes, you have done so. I do suffer, and I shall suffer all my life. You need not be proud of the feat you have accomplished. Lord Penrith, when this person has gone, we will speak together. Lord Penrith made no answer. Thinking of Beatrice, it was with great difficulty that he refrained from taking the man before him by the throat and ending the life that seemed to him accursed. Lady Penrith read his thoughts in his agitated face and trembling frame. Nay, dearest Hildebrand, he said, that will but make matters worse. Be calm and patient. Blind hot rage will not help us. Valerie made a sweeping bow. My mission is accomplished, she said. You know, Lord Penrith, if anyone attempts to win your consent to this marriage, what will happen? I shall be there. I shall stand by the altar and the priest to denounce him. And your name shall be associated with the greatest scandal that has ever been known even in this land of scandals. Threats would never deter me from doing what I thought right, said Lord Penrith. Then without another word he opened the door and held it, a hint that no person could mistake. I must express my opinion of you, he said to her. Lord Kelso does not shine in the stories you have told, but the most contemptible person I know or have heard of is yourself. Lady Penrith said no word as the woman who had marred her daughter's life passed out of sight. But she stood there with a look on her face that hurt Lord Kelso more than anything else in this world. Who is to comfort my child? She said to her husband. Who is to tell her? Then Lord Kelso went nearer to her and bowed his head before her. Lady Penrith, he pleaded, will you listen to me? Need this cruel deed be done? Need Beatrice be told? My follies or sins were all over before I ever saw her. Since I have known her, I have been true to her in thought, word, and deed, just because she is so sweet and innocent. I would respect her innocence and shield her with the best strength of a man. Could you forgive me? The passionate sorrow in his voice touched her gentle heart. I could forgive you, she said, but I could never give you my beautiful loving child. Think better of it, he cried with passionate energy. I own my crime. I have done wrong. I am heartily sorry for it. I would undo it if I could. I would make any atonement I could. No man can do more. That is true. But what you have done quite unfits you to be my daughter's husband. I should never rest for thinking of her. I should never be happy about her. I am one of those who consider the destruction of the soul as far worse than the ruin of the body. Lord Penrith looked at Lord Kelso. If my wife would give my daughter to you, I would not. I would sooner 1,000 times see her lying dead. Lord Kelso uttered a cry of despair. It seems unmanly to plead against your decision, he said. But do for heaven's sake stop and think. If you send me away, you make Beatrice suffer for my sins. What has Beatrice done? Nothing. That is the cruelest part of it, said Lord Penrith. She may suffer, and she will suffer. Better that than to link her life with such a life as yours. You are too hard, groaned Lord Kelso. I do not think so, said Lord Penrith. Then they were silent, while the carriage wheels of the woman who had come down upon them like a whirlwind rolled down the avenue. We have to consider our name, said Lord Penrith. Even if my wife and myself were willing now to give our daughter to you, you remember what that woman said? That she would denounce you before the priest and the people, and that such a scandal should hang round your name as has never been heard before. You remember? She would not dare do anything of the kind, he cried indignantly. She would both dare and do, said the Earl. No such scandal must attach itself to my beloved child. The matter is ended, and forever. My strongest condemnation and reprobation rest with you. You have wronged heaven and man. Your soul wants washing in tears of penitence, your life reforming. But under no circumstances whatever can you be permitted to see Beatrice again. The proper and manly course will be for you to leave Penrith at once. Even he, in his righteous anger, was struck by the keen pain on the handsome face before him. A low cry came from the Earl's lips. "My little love," he said to himself. He looked up at Lord Penrith with haggard eyes. "Do you know," he cried, "that I left her half an hour ago with loving words on her lips, and that she is waiting for me. She asked me not to be long, and I promised to hurry back to her. You cannot be so cruel as to say that I must not see her again, my little loving love." And the strong man, the man who had thought so little of the sufferings of others, covered his face with his hands and wept aloud, such tears as men weep only once in life, and that is when their dearest hope is slain. Even those who were incensed against him felt sorry for him in that hour. "I must see her once more," he cried. "I shall go mad if you forbid it. Just once, oh Lady Penrith, you have a woman's heart, and it must be a kind one. Let me see her once, only once." Lady Penrith held up her hand. "I shall look upon you always as my child's murderer," she said. "Beatrice will never be happy again." "But you will let me see her," he pleaded. "Once, only once." "It must rest with Lord Penrith," she replied. "It must rest with Beatrice herself," said Lord Penrith. "If it will lessen her sorrow and she wishes to say goodbye to you, she may do so. But it must be goodbye. What do you propose to do?" "I wish you to leave my house at once." "My punishment is hard," cried Lord Kelso, "harder than I can bear." "I wish you to leave at once," said Lord Penrith. "I will send word to my daughter that you have been compelled to return to London on particular business. Do not give either Lady Penrith or myself the pain of looking upon you again." "But you will let me see her once again to say goodbye? You will not refuse me? It is the desperate prayer of a desperate man. I will consider it. If my daughter asks me, I shall not refuse her, but I shall take her out of England at once." In silence Lord Kelso quitted the room. End of chapter 67. Chapter 68 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay Mala. Chapter 68. The Father's Explanation. Every fashionable newspaper in London had the same paragraph. Postponement of the marriage of the Earl of Kelso. The marriage of Lord Kelso is postponed owing to the very serious illness of Miss Penrith, whose condition is a source of great anxiety to her relations. Those few lines did not tell much of the tragedy which had taken place at Penrith Castle, but that told all the outer world ever knew. In one of its grand old rooms, overlooking the river with its rush of waters and the works, a large room, bright and lofty, a young girl lay doing hard battle with death, lay like a bruised flower, like a broken lily, her fair head tossing wildly on the pillow, a wistful hunted look in her eyes, as though the pain were too great. She longed to die, while all in the house moved with silent footsteps, and the sound of a laugh was never heard. It was as though the sun had set, and everlasting night reigned. That bright, beautiful Beatrice should be lying there, the golden hair all down, the beautiful face either white and worn, or flushed and fevered, sick unto death, with that one fever for which there is no cure. She looked at the doctor who came to attend her. "Do not try to cure me," she said to him. "Let me die." That was the burden of her song. Let me die. She had not said much when they told her. She listened to all, and when Lord Penrith had finished, she cried out, "You say I must give him up? I cannot, I cannot." She wrung her hands with a low cry, a despairing gesture. "I cannot," she repeated. "I am sorry he has not been a good man, but good or wicked, I love him, and I cannot give him up." She listened with a ghastly face while Lord Penrith told her the story, in the best and kindest words he could find. If his own sins did not lie like a great gulf between you, Beatrice, he said, you could not marry him. That fair young name of yours must not be blackened with calumny, and that woman will keep her word. You must try to forget him. Forget him, Papa? I will, when my heart forgets to beat and my eyes forget to see. I will forget him when the sun is darkened and the moon gives no light. When my body forgets my soul and heaven forgets me, then will I forget my Earl, my Earl. My Beatrice, said her father gently, you are too good, too noble to love a worthless man. He is not worthless, she repeated. He may have been wicked. He may have done all these terrible things you say. But he is not worthless. She listened to him with a face so ghastly and with trembling hands, with such anguish in her eyes, that Lord Penrith said to himself it was worse than slaying her. Every now and then the white hands were clenched, as if the pain were unendurable. When Lord Kelso left the room that evening, husband and wife turned and looked at each other in silence. Lady Penrith was the first to break it. With pale, trembling lips, she said to him, what shall we do, Hildebrand? Who is to tell her? I cannot. She will die, my beautiful wounded dove. She will die. Ah, no. Grief does not kill so quickly. It would be better if it did. I loved you, Hildebrand, she said gently, and I am quite sure that if the same thing had happened to me, it would indeed have been my death. Lord Penrith kissed his wife's troubled face. We must do the best we can for her, my darling, he said, and the best, heaven knows, is bad enough. I will break it to her. She will suffer less with me, perhaps, than with you. Heaven help me. If ever I meet that man again, and there is no restraint upon me, it will be his life or mine. Philippa, darling, try to cheer up. It may not be so bad. She is young. She may soon recover. She may not take it so deeply to heart. Time heals all wounds, even the wounds of death. In 3 or 4 years, she will have forgotten him. Let us hope. But even as he spoke, his heart was heavy, and Lady Penrith only wept the more. I feel, she said, as though I had been stabbed to the heart. I feel as though I could never leave this room and face life again. Go to your own room, Philippa. Yet no, for her sake we must keep up appearances. We must not let the servants suspect anything. We must go to dinner as usual and endure the ordeal in the best way we can. I shall tell Beatrice that Lord Kelso has gone to town on important business. Then you can go to your room, and I will break it to the poor child. We must shield her. We must think for her. It will never do to have any of this known. The least hint of this would be the child's ruin. Remember how much of her future depends on your self-control now. And those few words gave the unhappy mother courage to help Beatrice. She would bear and suffer much. All was done as she wished. The news soon spread throughout the castle that Lord Kelso had been suddenly summoned to London, and no one had the wit to connect his sudden journey with the appearance of the foreign woman who had demanded to see Lady Penrith. Husband and wife left the room where Lady Penrith had heard what she knew to be her daughter's death knell. She went to her room. He sought his daughter. He heard her now in the music room. She was sitting where her lover had left her, singing over and over again to herself the beautiful lines of the sweetheart song. Oh, love for a year, a month, a day, but alas for the love that loves alway. He stood for a moment and looked at her. That peaceful, tender expression was never to be on her face again. He thought of an innocent lamb with the knife at its throat, of a white dove with the cruel bat that is tearing its innocent heart. And strong as he was, his heart grew sick at the thought. Suddenly Beatrice saw him, and she sprang from her seat with a joyful cry. Papa, why did you send for my Earl? How cruel it was of you! That 1/2 hour in the music room is the only time we have just before dinner. And we have so much to say. I tell him everything. A happy, dreamy smile came over her face, and in the full gladness of her heart, she kissed her father's hand. It was strange that he made no answer, but looked at her with an indescribable something in his face. "Where is Lord Kelso, Papa?" she cried. "He said he would not be long." What was he to say to her when he knew that in this life she would never see him again? End of chapter 68. Chapter 69 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay-Mala. Chapter 69. Night Forevermore. "My dear Beatrice," he said gently, "you must try not to be disappointed. Lord Kelso has been suddenly summoned to London." How could he go on? She started as though she had been shot. The lovely colour died from her face, leaving the very lips white. A dark shadow came into her eyes. "To London? Oh, Papa, it cannot be true." "To London without seeing me? You are jesting. But it is a cruel jest, a horrible jest. Let me go to him." "My dearest Beatrice, it is no jest, and he had no time to see you. He was compelled to go by the next train, and he had not one moment to spare." "Papa," she cried, looking at him with great solemn eyes, her face growing more ghastly in its pallor. "Papa, tell me the truth, the perfect truth. Is he dead?" "Dead?" cried Lord Penrith. "No, child, certainly not. It is as I tell you. He has been obliged to start suddenly for London, and he had no time to see you." She laid her hand on her heart. "I have a strange feeling here," she said quietly. "Such a strange feeling, Papa, as if something had happened to him." "Why did you ask me if he were dead?" asked Lord Penrith, who had hardly recovered from the shock of the question. "I did not think he could leave me without one word or one kiss," she said slowly. "It is so unlike him. He never forgets me, no matter how great his hurry is. It would not have taken him one moment to have said, 'Goodbye, Beatrice, I am coming back tomorrow.' It is cruel of him," she said in her soft, gentle voice. "He said he should not be more than a few minutes away. What shall I do, Papa?" And she looked wistfully in his face. What could he say, who knew that she would never see him more? "I cannot help thinking there is something wrong," she continued. "It would be better to tell me. He is ill, perhaps, or there is some misfortune. I am quite sure he would not go to London without speaking to me. It is not pleasant business that has taken him away, and he was certainly much put out." "That would not matter," she said. "Nothing but death would make him forget me. If he had unpleasant business, he should have told me, and I would have comforted him. Papa," she continued eagerly, "if he has lost all his money, you would not let that part us?" "No, my darling," he said gently. "Money should not part you." "Was it about this same business that you sent for him, Papa?" she said, and something of relief came over her face. If her wise, kind, good father knew it, there could be nothing wrong. "Yes," he replied. "It was business that came to my knowledge, and I sent to tell him." "Ah, then it will be all right if you know, Papa. You are so wise, so good, so clever. You can do anything. When will he come back? Will he come tomorrow?" She laughed a curious, wistful laugh that he never forgot. "I hope he will not be long away. I do not know what I should do now, Papa, without him. It would be like living without sunshine, or flowers, or anything else that makes life bright. When will he come back again?" "I do not know. It is not certain. Ah, there is the dinner bell. I am a very poor substitute for Lord Kelso. Let me take you into dinner, Beatrice." And so long as he lives, Lord Penrith will never forget that dinner, will never forget the effort he had to get through it. Lady Penrith came down, and they contrived to get up some kind of conversation. But it was easy to see how great the effort was. Beatrice grew more and more sure every moment that something was wrong. How great and terrible that wrong was, she little dreamed. When dinner was over, Lady Penrith went to her own room, and Lord Penrith took his daughter to the drawing room to tell her the truth. Never again in his life, Lord Penrith said to himself, could he ever go through such a scene. It was over at last, and she knew that she should never see the man she loved so dearly again, except to bid him farewell. On the whole, she had borne it better and more quietly than he had dared to hope. She had finished speaking. She had said the last word, and she was sitting in the easy chair he had placed for her, pale and silent, her hands folded, her eyes half closed. Lord Penrith took her in his arms and kissed her. You cannot tell the torture it has been to me to tell you this, Beatrice. And your mother, she feels it so keenly that she is quite ill. You are a good, brave child, and you have borne it well. Your mother, I know, is breaking her heart over you. Let me take some message to her that will console her and cheer her. There was little enough to cheer or console in the white face raised to his. Little enough. She tried to smile, but there was only a quiver on the white lips. You are very kind to me, Papa, she said. Very kind. Tell dear Mamma that I have heard it all, yet that I am not dead. He bent over her in infinite distress. The simple, pitiful words went through his heart, for they hinted to him a state of distress greater than he could imagine. He made her lie down on the couch. He begged her to try to read. He found for her an amusing book, which he opened at an amusing chapter. He left her with cheering words, hoping in his inmost heart that the worst was over. He went to Lady Penrith and told her the very words. Did she say that she had heard it, yet is not dead? Ah, then it is worse even than I feared. Go back to her. Hildebrand, do not leave her. But when Lord Penrith went back, he found that Beatrice was lying where he had left her, but cold, white, and senseless. At first, he thought that she was dead. After a time, he found that her heart was still beating. Still, for her sake, desirous of keeping up appearances, he went at once to Lady Penrith. There is one person we can trust and trust entirely, she said. That is Miss Brooke. Go and bring her. I will go to Beatrice. Lord Penrith found Miss Brooke in the schoolroom trying to read, but really ill with suspense. She, with the rest of the household, had heard that Lord Kelso had left suddenly for London, and she, knowing that Valerie had been there, felt certain that something terrible had happened. Lord Penrith was too ill and too anxious himself to notice the condition in which he found his governess. Lady Penrith wants you, Miss Brooke, he said. We are in great trouble. Will you come to her? In silence he led the way to the drawing room, and in silence she followed him. Beatrice lay there white and silent, Lady Penrith bending over her in a passion of tears. It has killed her, Hildebrand, she cried. I knew it would. Hush, Philippa, said her husband, as he carefully locked the door. Remember that her whole future depends on your self-control now. She will have no future, cried Lady Penrith with fast-falling tears. She is dead. Agatha knelt down by the white silent figure. Was there ever anything so like a broken lily? She said quietly. Beatrice is not dead, Lady Penrith. She has fainted. I do not even think that she is going to die. Is she ill? Tell Miss Brooke, Hildebrand, said Lady Penrith. We may trust her. She will keep our secret. You may trust me, Lady Penrith, said Agatha gently. I will do all I can for you or for Beatrice. It is a horrible thing to tell you, Miss Brooke, said Lord Penrith. "But like my wife, I have the most implicit confidence in you. You know how well the poor child loved Lord Kelso. We have heard that about him today, which has caused me to dismiss him from the house, to forbid him to seek my daughter again. And of course, it has entirely put an end to the engagement." Her heart beat so quickly she feared lest they should hear it. This was the object of Valery's visit then. "Do you think it true?" she asked with white quivering lips. "I know it. He admitted it," said Lord Penrith. "Would you mind very much telling me what it was?" he asked. She could not help the question, and it did not strike him as being unusual. "I cannot tell you all. There was a little story about some Lady G, which I could not repeat. There was another of some very good and innocent girl whom he had cruelly deceived. For a moment a great mist came before her eyes, and she feared lest she should fall dead at his feet. It was of her he was speaking. It was her own sad story that had almost killed Beatrice, and had parted her from her lover. In fact," continued the Earl, "his character is not that of an honourable man. I would not trust my child's happiness with him. There was something about herself too, the woman I mean, who came to tell us. He had promised to marry her, if he were free. He wondered why she turned from him with that sharp sudden cry, and knelt down again by his daughter's side. For a few minutes the whole world was chaos to her. He was even more worthless than she had thought. If this were true, even while she was still with him, he had been making love to Valerie, and had promised to marry her if it were true. The woman told us frankly," continued Lord Penrith, "that her motive was not to save Beatrice or to warn us, but to take a vengeance on him. Then it was true. He must have made that promise to Valerie even while she was with him." A low, bitter cry came from her lips. She had not believed it possible that she could suffer more, but this was harder than all to bear. Then her thoughts left herself as she looked at the pallid young face, which was as the face of the dead. It was the same sin, the same man. "I know it will kill her," said Lady Penrith. "What must we do, Miss Brooke?" Agatha thought of the time when she had lain under the trees, her heart broken, her life crushed. It was the same sin, the same man. She remembered that nothing had soothed her pain, and nothing, she felt sure, would help Beatrice. They had all the remedies they could think of, and the eyes that were never more to shine with a child's glee opened at last. She only woke from the trance of pain to fall into such a passion of sobs and tears as frightened them all. "Leave her to me, Lady Penrith," said Agatha at last. "She had told me all her love affairs. She made me her confidant. I feel sure that I can manage her better alone." Father and mother were only too pleased to do anything Agatha suggested. They left her alone with the weeping girl. The same sin, the same man. Was that the reason that Agatha drew the golden head to her breast? "Cry, my darling," she said. "Never mind if your tears scald me. Cry. It will take the sting from your pain." And Beatrice did cry, in a hopeless fashion that was pitiful to hear. Once she clung round Agatha's neck. "I do not care what he has done," she said. "I cannot give him up. Tell them. They must send for him, or I shall die. I must see him. I must look in his face, or I shall die." "There are some things worse than death," said Agatha. "Shame is worse, and sin is worse." Even in the midst of her terrible pain, Beatrice wondered why Agatha's face was as the face of an angel, so full of compassion and love, why she soothed her with skill and tenderness that no one else in the world could have used. She wondered, in dull, dreary fashion, if Agatha had ever gone through a great trouble. At last Agatha was able to go to Lady Penrith and tell her that she had taken Beatrice to her own room, and was going to sit up all night with her. She did so, and Agatha will never forget that night. There were times when, exhausted by her passionate tears, that Patrice seemed to fall asleep, and she would make such despairing cries that Agatha's heart almost stood still. But toward morning, when the red dawn came in the sky, she grew restless. Her face was flushed, and her eyes bright. I knew, she said, that it was too bright to last. It was like living always in the sunshine. I told him yesterday that I could not realize the happiness of being with him always. And now I am not to see him again. I told him so. I cannot believe that I shall never see him again. I stretch out my hands, thinking I must see him. I cry out to him, and I think he will answer. He seems to be standing there and there, but when I go to him, he fades away, fades quite away, and the dark, beautiful face is so sorrowful. I told you, did I not, that the first time I saw him, I was struck by the sadness in his eyes. That shows he was not a wicked man. Wicked men do not look sad. They do not care enough to look sad. Ah, my Earl with the beautiful eyes, come back to me. And then Agatha tried, but vainly, to teach her how much better it was to be patient and bear. You would not think so if he had been your lover. You cannot tell what he was, because he never loved you. But he loved me. He loved me, and I cannot lose him. The same sin and the same man. Yet Agatha dared not tell her so, dared not tell her that she had suffered before every pang that Beatrice was suffering now. Beatrice raised her flushed face and bright eyes from the pillow. I am quite determined over one thing, she said. I will not let Papa or Mamma see how it hurts me. The more they will see me suffer, the more they will dislike him. It will be quiet morning soon. I shall get up and do everything just as I have been accustomed to only. And a great dreary sob for a few minutes choked her. Only there will be no love to think about, and no wedding day. I shall not complain, she went on, and then, if they do not see that I am very unhappy, they will think less unkindly of him. What a long night it has been, and how good you have been to sit up with me. It will be night now with me forever and forever more. No more sunlight. Then Agatha whispered to her that when the sun shone no more on earth, and one bore the darkness quite patiently for a time, there would be a glorious sunlight in heaven. Ah, in heaven, sighed the girl drearily. Do not think I am wicked, Miss Brooke, but do you believe that for me there can be any heaven without him? Yes, everything in this world is as nothing compared with the life to come. You will understand that when human love is dead in your heart. End of chapter 69. Chapter 70 of The Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinemala. Chapter 70. A Last Request. The resolution that Beatrice had made she tried to keep, although the next morning she felt very ill. She would rise and go down as usual, take breakfast with Lord and Lady Penrith, go about her daily avocations. It was better for his sake, she repeated to herself, when her strength failed her. They would blame him less. But there was something so wistful, so pathetic in the girl's face that both parents felt it much worse than if she had spent the day in weeping. When Lady Penrith asked her to drive out with her, she was willing, and during her absence, Agatha, by her mother's wish, collected everything, every souvenir of Lord Kelso, and they were stowed away in one of the great wardrobes. All the wedding trousseau, the dresses, the laces, the furs, the jewels were locked away. All the books he had given her, all the music, the numerous presents, nothing was left about that could in any way remind her of him. If she noticed it on her return, she said nothing. She made no remark or comment. She never inquired where anything was. But that night her face was so white and death-like, Lady Penrith was alarmed. "She cannot keep it up," she said to her husband. "She will break down and die." Lord Penrith was more cheerful. "She was making a great effort," he said, "and he thought she would get over it." No one knew that there was anything wrong. Everyone knew that Lord Kelso had gone up to town on sudden and important business. "The marriage settlements, my dear," whispered one dowager to another. "I hear they are magnificent." Lord Penrith had made up his mind as to his course of action. He wished the whole matter to remain in abeyance the next 2 weeks, during which time he intended to make arrangements for taking his family abroad until the whole affair was forgotten. He did not wish one word to be said until they had started, for he knew well his proud beautiful Beatrice would never bear the comments made, never bear the remarks and condolences. He must take her away from them. When they had left England, then there could be an announcement in the papers that the engagement was broken off and the anticipated marriage at an end. Beatrice would be out of reach of gossip then. She could not hear the comments of the curious, and he would take care that she did not return to England until it was forgotten. He confided his plans to no one except Lady Penrith, and she quite agreed with them. People said that Miss Penrith was not looking well. She kept out of all observation as well as she could. But if she had to see visitors or go anywhere with Lady Penrith to make a call, she went through it bravely. It was only afterward that they knew what the effort cost her. Afterward, when they found out that she had worn away her strength even to the last remnant of her life, she grew paler and thinner every day. It was marvelous to see the change that came over her bright young loveliness. The color left her face, and her eyes were always dim and heavy with long weeping. All the pretty girlish graces were gone. She did her best, but her heart was crushed. How she lived through the long torture of each day, she never knew. The only comfort she had was in going to Agatha. Agatha grew accustomed to seeing the pale, wistful face at the schoolroom door. Whatever she was doing or might be her occupation, she instantly put it aside and hastened to her. "Will you read to me, Miss Brooke?" she would say. "I am so tired." She would lay her burning head on Agatha's knee. "I am always so tired," she said, "and your reading soothes me." So Agatha read in a voice sweet as music. But she knew that the girl never heard one word. She was thinking all the time of her love and her sorrow. And Agatha noticed how thin and how pale she was growing. Her hand was almost transparent, and a great fear came to her lest the girl should die, should fade away, and no one realized the fact until it was too late to save her. It was only 10 days since Valery's evil presence had overshadowed the house. Only 10 days. But it seemed like an age. "Beatrice looks very ill," said Lady Penrith to her husband one morning. "Let us get away as soon as we can. It is not only that she has lost all her color and her strength, but for the last day or two her eyes are quite wild, and they have a dazed expression in them that frightens me." "I am using all the speed possible," said Lord Penrith. But something happened that same day which showed him all his plans, arrangements, and precautions were quite in vain. He was sitting in the library after luncheon, busily engaged in writing letters about the journey, when Beatrice came into the room. The sunlight from the window fell full upon her, and he was horrified at seeing how terribly ill she looked. He could hardly believe that she was the brilliant, beautiful Beatrice of 2 short weeks since. "I have come to sit with you, Papa," she said. "Lady Chavez is with Mamma, and they are talking. My head aches. May I stay here?" "You looked very tired, Beatrice. I should think sleep would do you good." She shuddered at the word. "I dread sleep, Papa," she said. "Sleep means dreams, and dreams are death." He drew the couch near to the fire. "Rest, my darling," he said, Here is a soft pillow for your head. Close your eyes. They look quite tired and strained, dear. Have you been crying, Beatrice? No, Papa. My head aches. It has a queer burning pain. Do not let me interrupt you. I felt nervous and wanted to be near you. And suddenly it seemed to him she was fast asleep. She looked like a beautiful marble statue. There was no color about her except the gold of her hair, the dark penciled brows, and her sweet, sensitive lips. How white and worn she was! Her hands were quite transparent. The lovely dimples he could no longer see. The face was worn and thin. Good heaven, he cried to himself. The child is dying before our very eyes, and we have not seen it. He watched her in silence. If the man who had taken that young heart had been there in that moment, it would have gone strangely with him. Lord Penrith was a strong man, by no means given to sentiment or emotion. But his eyes filled with tears as he watched the silent figure. He had not realized till then how desperately ill and changed she was. She was muttering something in her sleep. He would not listen, but he heard the words, my love, my love. And then, to his infinite distress, she was awake and clinging to him with bitter cries. I fell asleep, Papa. Oh, do not let me sleep again. I always see him in my dreams. He comes to me and tells me it is all a mistake, that I must wake up and talk to him. Then when I wake, I remember. My darling Beatrice, cried Lord Penrith, what can I do for you? Kill me, she said. There was a father in history who slew his daughter. Slay me. She bared her white throat before him. Kill me, she cried. The only kindness left for me is death. A knife here will not hurt me as much as the sword in my heart does, Papa. I knew I could not live without him. The words came slowly. The last one died away and she fell on her face with a cry that he never forgot. That was how her illness began, and the end of it for a long time no one could foresee. It was not fever, although her mind wandered and her lips never ceased the low muttering of unintelligible words. The doctors who came round her could give her illness no name, but they seemed to think she would never recover. Agatha seldom left her. The duties of the schoolroom were placed in other hands. Agatha found that the most painful part of the watching was this, that whenever the hapless girl fell asleep, she had the self-same dream. It was that it was a mistake, that there was no truth in those foolish stories, and that she must wake up and talk to him. Always the same dream. The doctors could do nothing, and rumours said that beautiful Beatrice Penrith must die. Then paragraphs filled the papers, and the country people told each other how sad it was that so brilliant a marriage must be postponed. Many a wise old dowager repeated to herself the proverb, a marriage delayed is a marriage marred. But no one seemed to think it strange that Lord Kelso did not go to the castle. Beatrice had read the opinions of the doctors in their faces. I am to die, she said to Agatha. I saw it today in Sir Richard's face. I am to die. I am so glad, so thankful. I shall rest there without those cruel dreams. Tell him, my Earl, if you see him, that if he comes to my grave and calls my name, I shall hear him. Do you think they would let me see him before I die? But Agatha could not answer for her fast falling tears. That same evening, Lord Penrith went to see his daughter, and with one thin pale hand, she drew his face down to hers. Papa, I want to ask you a favour, the last I shall ever ask in this world. Will you grant it? I will, my darling, if I can, he replied. You can, dear, if you will, she said. I am going to die. No one says so, but I read it on the face of everyone who comes near me. Let me see him before I die. Will you? My darling, he cried, can you ask me no other favour than that? No, she said, you must grant it. If you do not, I shall not rest in my grave. I must see him. It is not as you think. She added, I do not know how long I have been lying here, but my illness has changed me. It is not that human love now. I will tell you why I want to see him. He did love me. Ah, do not shake your head, Papa. He did love me, and I think if I could see him and talk to him, I could make him a better man. Are you willing, Papa? Oh, child, it tears my heart, he cried. But you will say yes. You need not see him, and I will not keep him long. If you say yes, Papa, I shall sleep tonight, for I am so tired. He said yes, and on the day following, Lord Kelso received a telegram asking him to go to Penrith Castle at once. End of chapter 70. Chapter 71 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay. Chapter 71. I touch the hands of men of honor. There was nothing thought about on that day but the coming of the Earl. Lord and Lady Penrith had opposed it at first, but now they believed her to be dying, and as this was the last prayer she would ever make to them, they granted it. You will not let me see him, Hildebrand, said Lady Penrith to her husband. I could not bear it. There will be no need, he replied. I must see him myself, but you need not be tortured by the sight of him. There was one other person to whom the coming of the Earl meant much, and that was Agatha. She had suffered greatly. She found that in her heart great love for him lived still. She knew it by the infinite pity that was there, pity for his sorrow, and greater pity of all for his soul. A longing to see him, to console him, to try to lead him to a higher and nobler life, come over her as comes to all good women over the men they love. Yet it could not be. She could not see him. Lady Penrith had gone to the schoolroom on the morning of the Earl's expected visit. Beatrice was exceedingly ill, and the greatest anxiety prevailed over her. She told Agatha that Lord Kelso was coming, and that she dreaded the day. I do not wish the children to see him, Miss Brooke, she continued. They were so much attached to him, and he was so fond of them. You will keep them in the schoolroom, and not let them know anything about it. I will do anything and everything your ladyship wishes or desires, said Agatha. If she could have done so, she would have borne all the trouble and sorrow for each one. The fair loving child, cried Lady Penrith. Oh, Miss Brooke, why should this stern, strange, horrible fate have overtaken her? What a loving heart she had! I can see that all her life, past, present, future, is centered in this 1 hour in which she will see him. She lies like a broken lily. No pain on her face, but anxious waiting. Her face quivers at every sound. Yet she knows he cannot come until noon. It is 1,000 times worse than standing by to see her die. I feel all her pain. It seems to pass through my heart as well as hers. Ah me, what ruin, what havoc one man can make. Who knew that better than the girl whose heart had been crushed? I wish, cried Lady Penrith in desperation, it had never happened. And I wish that horrible malicious French woman had stayed at home. It was all malice, all spite. I am sure he loved my daughter, and he would have made her a good true husband. That I honestly believe, said Agatha, and Lady Penrith was pleased with her fervour. I shall go to my rooms, she returned, and I shall remain there until he is gone. Lady Penrith asked Agatha, do you think there is no hope for Beatrice? I am afraid not, and I do not think those who love her best could wish her to live. Her life without him would be a living death. Like my own, said Agatha to herself, like my own. Then Lady Penrith went away, and the schoolroom doors were shut. He who had been life of her life, her love, the lover of her heart, was coming, for the last time, and she should neither see nor hear him. It was bitterly hard. The children were told their sister was very ill and that the house must be kept very silent. They were not to go down to the dining room as usual, but to take luncheon with Miss Brooke in the schoolroom. Children are always pleased with novelties, and this was one to them. It was a beautiful day. There was morning on the sweet face of nature. The sky was blue, the sun bright and warm. The air was sweet and odorous, the birds singing, the lovely flowers holding up their hands to greet the sun. The bright deep river was flashing in the light. The trees were like little green realms of sunlight and song. All the thoughts of the interests and love of each member of that large household were centered in the room where Beatrice lay, the same room wherein she had shown the suite of pearls to Agatha, and had told her all about her happy love, lofty and bright, with large windows that overlooked the river and park, a room just suited to a beautiful young girl, furnished in light satin wood, with hangings of pale blue silk and white lace, a carpet that looked like forget-me-nots covered with snow, a few choice flowers and favorite books, a few favorite engravings, and in them one read the character and tastes of the beautiful girl whose heart had been so cruelly broken. There was the ever-fresh and beautiful engraving of Dante and Beatrice, with the lovely upraised face. There was Schaeffer's beautiful Christian martyr, the fair virginal body floating on the dark stream, and on the wall, where the sunbeams fell warmest and brightest, was a copy of the world-renowned picture of Christ before Pilate, a picture that Beatrice had always liked and admired. The light fell on the divine face, so full of love, so grave in its simple splendor, contrasting in its kingly dignity and godlike meekness with the half-frightened, half-arrogant figure of Pilate. "What is truth?" Pilate had asked, and as the once bright eyes of Beatrice Penrith lingered on the picture, she sighed the same words over again to herself. What is truth? She had not found it in the heart of man. She had not found it in love. She would find it in heaven, where the light of the divine face would shine forever and forever more. She did not wish to live. The spring of her life was broken. Earth had lost all its charm. Neither love of parents nor friends could suffice for her, since she had tasted the sweetest and brightest of earthly loves. She had looked into the long stretch of years that people call life, into the future, and she saw in it nothing but the chill of desolation and despair. Rather death, rather a green grave under the old trees, where he would come sometimes and feel sorry that his love had killed her. Rather the grave for her body and heaven for her soul, than life with the never-ending pain of losing him. She had lain still, watching that divine face with its promise of pardon, until in some measure the human love had grown weaker in her heart, until she thought more of heaven than of earth, until she thought more of her lover's soul than his love. Day after day, week after week, she had lain there thinking. As the line of the coast fades from the eyes of the traveller seaward bound, the lights die and the cliffs grow dim, so it was with her. The lights of the world, the line of life, the coast of time grew dim, and before her lay the great boundless sea of eternity. Her simple childlike faith shone out with the clear bright beauty of a star on a dark night. She had always been what is called a good girl, had said her prayers, and had carefully refrained from anything she knew to be wrong, because she would not make God angry. She had always hoped to go to heaven, but now, as she lay with the receding tide of time beating in her ears, she thought more deeply still. She hoped to go to heaven, but she wished also that her lover might be there. She felt sure in her simplicity that even in heaven she should feel pain over him if he were not there. He must go. She dared not think of what she had read about torment for the wicked. He must not be classed among the wicked. She must see him and tell him how willingly she would give her life for his if he would be sorry and try hard to go to heaven. After all, time was short and eternity long. Better to be with him forever in heaven than for a short time on earth. So she lay with her eyes fixed first on the blue sky, then on the divine face on the picture. Her thoughts bent on one thing: how she could persuade him to be good. Were they true? She wondered all the things they had said of him, that he had betrayed the trust of the innocent, had spread ruin and devastation where he should have given happiness. He had been so bad, her father said, that he could not speak of his crimes. Ah well, many and many a poor sinner had knelt at those divine feet. If he would not kneel there himself, she would kneel for him. And well, after all, she loved him. Insensibly, the nature of her love had changed. She no longer thought of him as her noble, handsome lover, her Earl, but as one whom she had lost in this world, but wanted to see in heaven. Her prayer was answered at last. She had said to her father on the evening before that she was growing weaker and would like to see the Earl while she could talk to him. And it was then Lord Penrith telegraphed to him and the Earl came. Lord Penrith met him in the great entrance hall. The Earl held out his hand. Lord Penrith frowned darkly when he saw it. "I touch the hands of men of honour," he said, "not such as yours. I will finish my reckoning with you when my daughter is at rest." The words went like a barbed arrow through the heart of the unhappy man. "For heaven's sake, spare me," he cried. "I have enough to bear. No one strikes a downtrodden man." Lord Penrith made no answer. When they reached the corridor, he pointed to the room door. "My daughter lies dying there," he said. "If a murderer would see his victim, there you will find her." Lord Kelso's face was white and haggard with emotion. "Will you not come with me?" he asked. "No," replied Lord Penrith. "I am afraid if I saw her near you, I should do you deadly mischief. I could not help it. The nurse is there. I go. I cannot control myself. Go." He rapped gently at the door. It was opened by the nurse, who looked at him with quiet intelligence in her eyes. "Can I see Miss Penrith now?" he asked. The woman looked pityingly at the dark, handsome face from which the pride and light had gone forevermore. "Miss Penrith is expecting you," said the nurse. And then he heard a faint, sweet voice say, "Come in." He had expected anger and reproach. He had looked for accusation and tears, for hard words. But no, 1,000 times no. A sweet face with eyes full of longing was turned to him. Wistful eyes, so full of pain they pierced him. Two fragile, tender arms outstretched to him, and a gentle voice said, "Oh, my love, once again, just once again." And before he knew what he was doing, he was kneeling before Beatrice with her head pillowed on his breast. The vices of our youth make lashes for our age. As he knelt with that innocent face and dear head on his breast, vain Lord Kelso would have given his life to have undone his crimes. End of chapter 71. Chapter 72 of The Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay Mala. Chapter 72. The Victim of a Man's Sins. Lord Kelso tried to raise that pale, sweet face and dry the raining tears, but she clung the more closely to him. She had forgotten all they had said about his wrongdoing in that hour. She remembered only how she loved him. Until he died, he never forgot the words she whispered to him. They were sacred to him. No one else heard them. It was the girl's loving farewell to her love. Then he laid her head back upon the pillow, but she said, "No, while you are with me, let my head rest here. It is for the last time. Oh, my dear love, for the last time." "You are very ill, my sweet Beatrice," he said. Yes, I am going to die. I could not have lived without you. You have been my life from the first moment I saw you. Do you remember it? Oh, heaven forgive me, sobbed the unhappy man. Oh, Beatrice, I never meant to give you one moment's sorrow. I meant to make you so happy, and I have killed you. I am happy to die, she said. I could not live without you. I have been much happier since I was ill. Before that, I was mad. All the air around me seemed like burning fire. I used to go out into the woods, where no one could see or hear me, and cry out for you, stretch out my arms and cry to you. Ah, my love, my love. Nothing ever answered me but the rustling of the boughs and the leaves. I used to throw my arms around the rugged trunks of trees. I must not tell you all my misery, all my madness, none can know. The nights seemed to me as long as years. The days, oh vain, I tried to keep up. My darling, he murmured with tears. I tried to talk and laugh, to make mamma happy, and then go to my room and pray heaven to let me die. Oh vain, the sharp anguish, the bitter misery, the pain in my heart was so great, and now that it is over, I have but to die. My darling, he murmured again. Yes, your darling, always yours. Oh, Vane, I was so thankful when they said that I must die. When this peace and quiet and rest came to me, and I had no longer to keep up appearances. When I could lie and sob my heart away. Is it true, dear love? Are all the terrible tales they tell of you true? He would have given his life to have answered no, to have bidden that loving innocent child look up and believe him, to have kissed the sweet face and tell her it was a slander and a lie. Who says wrongdoing is not punished, even in this world? Lord Kelso knew. My darling, it is all true, he replied with bowed head and trembling lips. I humble myself before heaven and before you. It is all true, but let me add this. In those, the wicked days of my youth and my folly, I did not know you. Poor Vane, she said gently, I am sorry it is all true. She laid one hand gently round his neck until his dark, troubled face touched hers. I am sorry, she repeated, most of all for your sake. I would sooner die now and be with you forever in heaven. I shall be with you, shall I not? No one else has such a claim as mine. I shall have died for you. He remembered another face fair as angels, and he thought of the white lily he had beaten to the ground. But no one had died for him, and he could safely say, no, no one had such a claim. She smiled. Then I am more content, she replied. I would sooner lose my hold of you here and have you forever hereafter. He could only cry out that she was his darling and that he would give his life for hers. I wish, she said dreamily, that no one had ever told we should have been happy. I need never have known it. You would have been kind to me, and I am sure you are good now. I sent for you when they said I must die, because I wanted to see you. I am dying because my heart is broken, not crushed and aching, but broken. And I know, who know you so well, how you will grieve after me. I know you will. Whatever you may have done, you have always loved me. You will never show it to the world, but you will suffer. I want to make my memory pleasing to you and full of hope. I want you, oh my darling, to pledge yourself to me again and to promise you will come to me heaven. People say they do not know what heaven is like, but I know how good God is, and He will let us be together if you will try to come. Will you? He could not speak. He could only moan out his passionate despair. Then instead of thinking of me as a poor, pale-faced girl dying, you will think of me as a radiant Beatrice, like that," she added, pointing to the picture, "always watching and waiting and praying for you. Forget all about my illness and death. Go from the happy Beatrice, whom you left so short a time since, to the happy Beatrice waiting for you where the gates stand ajar. I want to speak to you, Vane. It is the last time, the very last time. Closer, dear, let me feel your face. They told me you had been a wicked man, and you say it is true," she continued, one little hand caressing the troubled face. "My darling, do you know that a wicked man cannot go to heaven? Heaven hates all wickedness and sin. I want you to come to heaven. Waiting for you there, time will cease to be. But you must be good. Oh, my beautiful love, whom I have lost on earth, will you try? Will you be good? Will you come to me?" "I will try," he said gently. "It will not be difficult, Vane," she said. "First and foremost, you must be sorry for all these faults and sins of yours." "Heaven knows, my dear, I am sorry for them," he replied, "with all my heart." Her pale face brightened. "Are you really sorry? I am so glad, Vane." "I do not want to make excuses for myself," he replied, "but no one ever taught me to be good. I was spoiled from the time I lay in my cradle." "Poor Vane," she said with beautiful compassion and tenderness. "Men do not know these things, but heaven does. I will tell you quite honestly, Beatrice," he said, "that the highest law I have followed has been always my own pleasure." "Poor Vane," she repeated with infinite gentleness. "And," he cried, "I am a miserable sinner, a most miserable sinner. But I will do better, and I will live so that I may come to you again." She laid her face on his, and there was infinite relief in the sigh she gave. "Oh, my Earl," she said, "my beautiful love, the only love I have ever had. Come to me, my darling, in another world. I who have lost you in this. Oh, Vane, my love, ought I to have said all these things to you? They were also angry with you, and perhaps, I cannot tell, perhaps I should not have kissed and caressed you. Should I have reproached you? But how could I, when I loved you so well? My darling, you have been a very angel of pity and mercy to me," he cried. "You have done for me what no one else could have done." Unutterable love shone in the sweet face she raised to his. "You are going to be good, just as I wish you," she said. "You will say your prayers, just as little children do, and you will be good to the poor. And Vane, what, my darling?" he whispered. "Papa says you have broken the heart of more than one girl. You will remember me, how I have suffered, if ever the temptation comes to you to break another. Look," she continued, "at that face in the picture. See how the sunlight touches it. The face is so grave, so divine, yet full of pity and mercy. That is the face that will shine on us in heaven." They heard impatient footsteps in the corridor outside, and the girl's face grew whiter. "That is Papa. He thinks you have been long enough with me. Oh, Vane, this is all the sorrow death held, bidding you farewell." In a passion of tears that he could not repress, he flung himself again on his knees. He had risen at the sound of those footsteps, and had unclasped her tender arms from his neck. "Will you forgive me, Beatrice?" he said. "Yes, with all my heart. I will tell you something, Vane. I should not say it, but that I am going to die. I would rather have loved you unhappily and die for you, than have been happy even with anyone else. Bend your face down to me. Let me look at it for the last time. Oh, beautiful face, goodbye. Vane, I wish you would kiss me, and I wish that I could die with your lips on mine." He bent down to kiss her. Once more he touched the sweet innocent lips that had known no other kiss. He caught the faint breath, the feeble sigh. At first he thought she was dead. The nurse came hastily forward, and he went away. If any man or woman lives foolish enough to think that wrongdoing is not punished in this world, they should have looked into the heart of that unhappy man. Lord Penrith was waiting in the corridor. "I will see you safely from the house," he said. "Lord Penrith," cried the Earl, "your daughter, the sweetest, truest, and purest soul on earth, has forgiven me. Can you not do the same?" "No," he cried, "and I never will. The word is wide. You might surely have found someone less dear, less precious than my daughter. Go and pray heaven I may never see your face again." He went trembling with a great dread. His nerves had been terribly strained. He had suffered more than words could tell. His brain seemed to be on fire. His head was aching with almost intolerable anguish. His eyes were blinded with tears. "Drive back to the station," he said to the coachman. "You need not wait for me." He felt that, even if he wandered in the grounds and the woods all night, he could not leave the spot where Beatrice lay dying. He went down the broad flight of marble steps. He remembered the day when she had stood there to welcome him to Penrith. He remembered the light in her eyes, the roses in her hair, and now she lay stricken unto death, all for him. She was the innocent victim of his sins. He thought of all the sacrifices he had ever read of. He thought of Abraham's son, his bosom bared to the knife. He thought of Jephthah's daughter, but surely there was never sacrifice like unto this. The brow of Cain was branded because his hand was wet with his brother's blood. How many lost souls weighed on his hands? How should he have been handled if justice had been done to him? The sun had set. No light lingered lovingly on flower or tree. There was a chill in the night air, a wail in the wind that made his blood run cold. He wandered through the grounds. He was a strong man, but he felt that if he could not weep out some of the bitter anguish that filled his heart, he should die. End of chapter 72. Chapter 73 of the Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay Mala. Chapter 73. Angel of my life, come back to me. Anywhere out of the sight of the house where she lay, whom his love had brought to this terrible point, he felt as though at one bound he could have fled from there to the utmost end of the earth, yet he could not leave the spot. He must watch the light from her windows, he must see if it disappeared, and if so, he should know what had happened. The handsome Earl whom all women had loved, the rich Earl whom all men had envied, was the most miserable man living on earth. Memory whipped him with scorpion whips. There was another face, fairer even than that of Beatrice Penrith, the face of a woman, fair as an angel, pure and innocent as a child. To his excited fancy, the two were almost one. This fairer face had long vanished from him. It slept, he firmly believed, under the waters of Lake Lucerne. If he had married Agatha Brooke, this tragedy would never have happened, and his thoughts went with the bitter curse to Valerie Danvers, who had worked him this deadly ill. If he had married Agatha, how small and partly and trifling all the reasons seemed to be that he had once thought all sufficient. For those who had flirted with him, who had met him halfway in this terrible game of flirtation, he felt no remorse, no pity. But the very life's blood of these two innocent girls was on his hands. How like they were in simplicity, in tenderness of heart, in childlike faith. How earnestly they both believed in being good and seeking for heaven. How earnestly they both believed in what he had once thought to be trifles, but which he found now were the most solemn things in life. There came back to his mind the old church with its great shady trees, the old-fashioned porch, the stained glass window in the east, where the fair form of the Christian Virgin Agatha shone, with the halo of gold around it, with the wind that wailed through the trees. He could hear the grand chant of the fair Agatha. He could hear the sweet, clear voice. He could see the childlike face that had looked at him such wonder, when he had said there was more than one Delilah. Where was she? Alas for his vile and miserable sin! What answer could he make to the great judge when the souls, the lives of these two innocent girls had to be accounted for? And as, unable to bear the weight of his misery, unable to endure the sting of conscience, he flung himself down on his knees. The prayer of the publican rose to his lips. O God, be merciful to me, a sinner. The handsome earl, whose eyes had lured so many hearts away, the wealthy earl whose riches no man had counted, cried out in utter abject sorrow for the wrong he had done. He knelt there in the midst of the dead leaves and the dry grass, and he cried aloud for pity and for comfort. He knew then, in that supreme hour of his life, that he loved Agatha best, that the great love of his heart and life had gone to her, and that he had loved Beatrice because she was so much like the girl who had believed herself to be his wife. That was no excuse. It did not undo the wrong. But it was true that the likeness he saw in the character of Beatrice to that of Agatha was the one great reason why he had been so attracted by her, and his love had slain her, as it had slain Agatha before her. Ah, if he could see her, the one true faithful love of his heart, if he could see her. And then the pain, the desolation in his heart grew so great that his pride all melted, and he wept aloud. He knelt among the dead leaves, the dry grass, and wept aloud. There are tears and tears, but surely some of them form jewels in heaven. He heard a rustling among the dead leaves, a sound as of something brushing the long grass. He knew that someone was advancing slowly toward him. He could not at first check his sobs or his tears, but he knew that the figure had stopped just before him, and he heard a faint low cry of fear and dismay. There was something familiar in the cry, something familiar in the unseen presence. He raised his face. At first, he saw only a long blue dress and a halo of golden hair. Then a pale, sweet face seemed to grow out of the shadows, a sweet, pale face, with a sacred, frightened expression, blue eyes into which sudden fear leaped. A sweet red mouth parted as though with surprise, and the faint sound died on the lips. For the first few minutes, he was paralyzed with fear. Then he stretched out his hands to her. Agatha, he cried, great heaven, can it be you? No other face on earth was so sweet, no voice so tender, no heart so true, no love so great, no pity so nearly divine. Agatha, he repeated, Agatha. She drew nearer to him, and it seemed to him that she did not touch the ground, but floated to him over the dry grass. And he could have cried aloud at the thought, was this the Agatha from the stained glass window, the Christian virgin, who would rather die than offend God, come to reproach him? A shudder of cold and fear came over him. It is I. Vane, be not afraid, she said. Agatha, he repeated. Ah, heaven, send that this be no fancy Agatha. She drew nearer until he clasped the folds of the blue dress in his hands. How shall I know that it is really you? He cried. I am mad with grief and shame. Have you risen from the dead? I am living and well, she replied. I am no spirit. Touch my hands. They are warm with life, not cold in death. He touched them, while the tears fell from his eyes and his lips quivered. Ah, they are warm and living enough. Kind, sweet hands they were, gentle, loving hands that ministered to me. Oh, Agatha, how shall I look at you? What shall I say to you? Did you mean to do me that cruel wrong? She asked gently. End of chapter 73. Chapter 74 of The Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Vinay. Chapter 74. The Earl's Atonement. I will not win your pardon even by a lie, he answered. Yes, at first I did mean it. You were only a simple country girl, but more beautiful than I had ever seen, and I thought, ah well, I dare not tell you what I thought, but I loved you. At first it was only a mild, sweet, mad fancy. I had had many such before, but I believed that it was sweeter, deeper, and more lasting. I confess all my shame and sorrow to you, though your eyes smite me with pain. I meant to take you away with me, but just then I did not think to make you my wife. I deceived you. Yet, except yourself, I think there was no other girl in the world who would have believed in that marriage. You did, Agatha, I know it. I did, she said. I believed in it. Now I cannot think how I was so mad or so blind, but it was real to me. I knew it. And then, Agatha, when you had been away only a few days, I found that I really loved you. I found that my heart and soul and life were engrossed in you, and I would have given the whole world to have undone what I had done. I swear to you that I loved you so well, I would have given my life to have undone the wrong. And I swear to you that I lived in an agony of fear lest you should ever know what I had done. I stayed so long in Switzerland, always hoping that I could invent some excuse for going through a legal form of marriage with you. My life is all stained with sin. I do not deny that. But I repeat that I longed to make you my wife, that you are the only woman whom I have truly loved or wished to marry. But for that vile woman's deed, that accursed woman who thrust herself between us, you would have been my wife, and this horror would never have happened. But tell me, Agatha, what brings you here? Oh, my lost darling, my lost love, stay here with me a while and tell me, what brings you here? She sat down on the fallen trunk of a tree with the dead leaves rustling around her, and he knelt at her feet while she told him all that had happened to her since the sunlit morning when he had left her, as they both thought, for a few short hours. The whole long history of the kindness of the noble French lady, the tragedy of the unhappy Phyllis Norman, of the way in which fate or providence had brought her to Penrith Castle. She spared neither him nor herself the details, and she lingered long over the story of Beatrice. Her voice was very low and gentle, but to him it was as clear and terrible as the voice of an accusing angel. Of all the cruel deeds of your life, Vane, he said, and some of them have been very cruel, this is the worst. That innocent loving girl, what harm had she done? None. I loved her because she was so like you. In her face there was a look of innocent wonder and sweet girlish surprise, just such a look as you wear, and it was for that I loved her. Then I believed you to be dead, and I mourned for you as few men mourn even for the wives they love. I meant to make her happy, Agatha. Be just to me. It is the punishment of my sin, no doubt. But it was not my fault that my enemy followed me and wreaked her wicked vengeance on that innocent head. If she dies, it will be Valerie who has slain her, not I. I would have been good and kind and true to her. O Agatha, angel of my life, come back to me. You wake into life all that was best in me. Come back to me and teach me the way to heaven. Heaven knows that if anyone had taught me or trained me when I was young, I should have been a different man. Will you forgive me, Agatha? I humble myself before you. I kneel before you and ask your pardon as the highest boon that heaven can grant me. You did me a cruel wrong, Vane. I did. But you yourself have taught me the greater the sin, the greater the repentance, the greater need for mercy. Forgive me, Agatha, even as you ask forgiveness yourself. And for all answer, she laid her hands once more in his. They were silent for some time, and then the Earl in a low voice said, You will let me atone to you, Agatha, for the wrong I did you? You will be my wife? I have not thought of that, she replied simply. In justice to yourself and to me, he said, Oh, my darling, I deceived you once. Trust me now. I will spend the remainder of my life in trying to atone to you for the wrong. I cannot say. Yes, I own that it is rightful restitution, nothing more. You are bound to give me back the fair name of which you robbed me. I admit that, but the question must stand. While Beatrice lives, I must remain with her. If she dies, I do not think there will be much hope left for either of us. If she lives, I will think and decide. Will she live, do you think? He asked. I have never thought her in such danger as others have done. And now, Wayne, she continued, we must part. I shall stay at Penrith Castle. In 6 months' time, if you wish, you can write to me here, and I will give you my decision. Heaven grant that it may be yes, he cried. Heaven grant that it may be for the best, she added. Agatha, he asked, will you write and tell me how Beatrice is? It will ease my heart and mind so much. I will write to you for that purpose, she replied, but not for any other. And he thanked her. Beatrice Penrith did not die. The visit, which everyone thought was the last of her life, proved to be turning point of her illness. The Earl had left her with, as he thought, the last breath almost on her lips. When she came back to herself again, it was with the sense of calm and rest to which she had long been a stranger. It very often happens that a strong love dies under the influence of a long illness. Such was the case with her. That she loved him well enough to die for him was true. She had expended what she thought to be for her last breath and her last degree of strength in trying to do him good. He had taken the deadliest sting of pain from her heart, and he had promised all she asked. For the first time for many long months, her heart was at rest, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, she was better, and a flutter of hope went through the whole household. The doctors said there was a chance. Instead of killing her, said Lord Penrith to his wife, I believe this visit of that man has done her good. They took such care of this new germ of life that she recovered, never to be the same bright, happy girl again, never to know unclouded happiness, but to save the man whom she loved so much from the deepest pain life could hold for him. It was a long, lingering, trying illness, but it killed the passionate love, as pain and weariness of life often do. While it lasted, Agatha was a most loving and constant nurse. She spent every spare moment with Beatrice. She soothed, calmed, and counselled her. To the end of her life, Beatrice Penrith remembered the lessons she learned during that time of convalescence. When she came back to life and health, she was no longer a bright, careless girl. She was a thoughtful woman with a heart full of pity for all who have to suffer. When she was able to travel, she went with her parents to Italy. She was always like one given back from death. She had been so sure of dying, and everyone else had been so sure. She had never thought it possible she could recover. She had been convinced that her heart was broken, but the young can suffer much, and it takes much to kill. She was never quite the same. She had lost the bright spirits and light heart. She had lost the sunshine from her eyes and from her laugh. But some of the noblest souls have passed through the furnace of pain. When the 6 months had ended, the Earl wrote and Agatha answered, yes. It was a duty he owed her, he said, and she would accept the only reparation he could make her. Not yet, she told him. She should wait until the return of the Penriths before she made any change in her life. She had been left in charge of the children, and she must fulfill her trust. He grew jealous and fearful. It seemed to him that she thought more of a reparation than of love. She spoke and wrote only of the atonement he owed to her, and which he was bound to make. But in those days she said nothing to him of love. To Agatha, the bare idea of having to tell her story to Lady Penrith was most painful, but she had to do it. She waited until that lady returned with her husband and Beatrice. Beatrice well, but not strong. Lady Penrith's wonder and pain were great. Agatha left her to tell as much of the story as she liked to Beatrice, but Lady Penrith said she should not mention it yet, and she could only hope that for some years at least they would not meet. It was some days before Lady Penrith could forget her surprise. There was great dismay at the castle when it was known that Miss Brooke was leaving. She was so beloved by the whole household. But she noticed one thing, that Lord Penrith never smiled upon her after he knew her story. They were married in London, very quietly, and without any display. Only 2 witnesses were present, distant relatives of the Earls, and no mention was made of the marriage, except in 1 or 2 papers. If ever man made ample reparation, it was vain. Lord Kelso. The first thing he did was to take his beautiful wife home to Whitecroft. There are things that will hardly bear the telling. This was one. What Lady Kelso felt when she saw the old church again, when she looked once more on the grand eastern window her mother had loved, when she saw the fair face of the saint shining on her, when she heard once more the grand roll of the organ, when she looked once more at the grave where her young mother slept, and the pretty village that had been her home. It was a sight to see the people clinging and weeping around her, so pleased once more to see the kindly beautiful face that had been to them as the face of an angel. No words could tell the joy of old John. To think that her beautiful mistress was a countess higher than my Lady Ruin. You told us you were married, she said, but oh, Miss Agatha, you should have told us to whom. We have wearied sore after you. David Brooke, absent as ever, did not express much surprise. I thought you would come back some day, my dear, he said. I knew that your mother's daughter could not go far wrong, but I am astonished that you have married an earl. Lord Kelso made himself everything that was most amiable. On John, he settled an annuity that made her in the eyes of the village a rich woman. He made friends with the doctor. Will you forgive me, he said, for running away with your daughter? I love her so much, and there were circumstances I cannot explain. We have been selfish to remain away so long, but you see I have brought her safely back. The doctor was made happy for life. He would not leave Whitecroft because his wife was buried there, but he accepted the handsome income that the Earl settled upon him, which enabled him to give up his profession and devote himself to the studies he loved. He would not leave his house, although the Earl urged him to do so. Agatha was rather pleased. She loved the little parlour, and she loved the garden gate where John had seen her talking to Sir Vane. Perhaps the most surprised was Lady Anne Ruin. Lord Kelso took his wife to see her, and her surprise was almost ludicrous. She was honestly pleased. It had turned out so much better than he had ever dared to hope. Agatha, Countess of Kelso, had no truer friends than Dr. Ruin and his wife Lady Anne. What wonders the Earl did in that village! Every man, woman and child was the better for his coming into it. He built model cottages at a low rental. He built new schools, a pretty little hospital, a library, and everything was called after his wife. The Agatha almshouse are considered the best in England. Then he took his wife to see Madame de Tierney, who was delighted to welcome her. The Count raved for a few days in the most romantic fashion, then declared that Lord Kelso was the finest man he had ever met, and swore eternal friendship with him. In Paris, they heard that Mrs. Norman was dead, and that fate had avenged her, for her husband had married again. His second wife was a beautiful young girl, one of the greatest flirts in Paris, who delighted in driving him to the verge of madness by jealousy, then laughing in his face. The mills of God grind slowly, though they grind exceedingly small. There also they heard of the brilliant marriage of Mademoiselle Danvers to the Duc d'Elbe. True, he was past 80. He had lost all his hair and all his teeth. He was crippled and decrepit. But he was one of the wealthiest peers in France, and madly in love with Valerie's beautiful face. That explains why she did not interrupt our wedding, Agatha, said the Earl. Every moment I expected to see her. But Agatha, looking in his dark, handsome face, so full of love, only murmurs a few words of pity, nothing more. She knows that Madame the Duchess d'Elbe will work out her own punishment in time. It was not the least of Lady Kelso's pleasures to go to the hospital of St. John and make there a munificent return of all the charity that had been shown to her. And then the Earl and Countess returned home. Lady Kelso never became a queen of fashion. She was never presented at court, and she never was queen of a London season. But no woman in England was more beloved or admired. She was famous for her charities, for her pious, gentle life, for her devotion to her husband and children, for her goodness to the poor. Everyone knew that there had been some story in her life, but no one ever suspected the truth. 3 years after their marriage, they heard good news of Beatrice Penrith. She had married Gerald Leigh, who was now at the head of his profession. When Lord Kelso read the news, he sighed, then turned to his wife and kissed her sweet face. She held her little son in his arms, and he kissed the child softly. Long years afterward, he met Lady Leigh, a grave, beautiful woman with the story in her face that he had written there. They were very silent when they met, each remembering the last parting. They said but little when they did speak, and Lady Leigh avoided meeting him whenever it was possible, although she was now a happy wife and a happy mother. So the story ends. But there is a moral. Do not believe, you who read, that a man can do wrong with impunity, that he can lead an evil life and then enjoy this life as though he had led a good one. Agatha had not sinned. She had been foolishly credulous, but she had not done wrong wilfully. The innocent must suffer with the guilty. She was happy, but she could have been happier. She did her best to forget. But there were times when all these memories rushed over her, and then happier women could be found than the Countess of Kelso. The Earl has everything that this world can give: a beautiful devoted wife, beautiful loving children, boundless wealth, perfect health, honor, fame, and every good gift. Yet he looks sad at times. He hears that Lady G's daughters, fine handsome girls though they are going all wrong because they have no mother to train or guard or take care of them. It comes home to him then and keeps his sins ever before his eyes. That is the inner life. Outwardly they are happy, prosperous and beloved, and the world lays its fairest flowers at the foot of one who had trodden on sharp thorns before she reached the land of roses. End of The Earl's Atonement by Bertha M. Clay.